Once upon a time, in a far-off kingdom, there lived a beautiful princess named Snow White. She had skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. Snow White was kind, gentle, and loved by all who knew her. She lived with her stepmother, the evil queen, who was jealous of Snow White's beauty and feared that she would one day surpass her. The evil queen was a powerful sorceress who had a magic mirror that told her everything she wanted to know. One day, the mirror told the queen that Snow White was the fairest of them all, and that she would eventually become the queen. The evil queen was furious and ordered a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and kill her. However, the huntsman took pity on Snow White and told her to run away. He killed a deer and brought its heart back to the queen, telling her that Snow White had been killed. The queen was overjoyed, but Snow White was not dead. She had found a small cottage in the forest where she met 7 dwarfs: Doc, grumpy, happy, sleepy, bashful, sneezy, and dopey. The dwarfs welcomed Snow White into their home, and she stayed with them. They taught her how to cook, clean, and do chores. Snow White was a quick learner, and soon she was doing all the household chores by herself. However, she never forgot to show respect to the dwarfs, who had taken her in and taught her everything she knew. Meanwhile, the evil queen discovered that Snow White was still alive when the magic mirror told her that the princess was living with the 7 dwarfs. The queen disguised herself as an old hag and offered Snow White a poisoned apple, which would put Snow White into a magical sleep. Snow White, not knowing that the apple was poisoned, took a bite and fell into a deep sleep. The dwarfs discovered Snow White and mourned her apparent death. They placed her in a glass coffin and held a funeral for her. Just as all hope seemed lost, a handsome prince came to the forest and fell in love with Snow White's beauty, even in death. As his servants were carrying the coffin, they stumbled, and the piece of poisoned apple was dislodged from Snow White's throat. Snow White woke up from her sleep and was reunited with the prince. They fell deeply in love and were married in a grand ceremony. The evil queen was punished for her cruel deeds, and Snow White lived happily ever after with her prince. However, Snow White never forgot the lessons she learned from the 7 dwarfs. She always remembered to be respectful to her teachers and those who had helped her in her time of need. She realized that if she had not shown respect to the dwarfs, they might not have taken her in and taught her the skills she needed to survive. As the years passed, Snow White became a wise and just queen, loved by all her subjects. She made sure that everyone in her kingdom was treated with respect and kindness, and she always remembered the lessons she learned from the 7 dwarfs. One day, Snow White decided to visit the dwarfs and thank them for everything they had done for her. When she arrived at their cottage, she found that they were still living there. They welcomed Snow White with open arms, and she spent the day with them, reminiscing about old times. As the day drew to a close, Snow White asked the dwarfs what she could do to repay them for their kindness. Doc, the wise dwarf, looked at her and said, "Snow White, you have already repaid us by being respectful and kind to us. You have shown us that you value the lessons we taught you, and that is the greatest reward we could ask for." Snow White smiled and hugged the dwarfs, thanking them again for everything they had done for her. As she left their cottage, she felt grateful for the lessons she had learned from them. She realized that being respectful to her teachers had brought her great rewards, and she made a promise to herself to always remember those lessons. And so, Snow White lived happily ever after, ruling her kingdom with kindness and wisdom. She never forgot the lessons she learned from the 7 dwarfs, and she always made sure to be respectful to those who had taught her. Years went by and Snow White had children of her own. She taught them the same values that the dwarfs had taught her. She told them stories of her time with the dwarfs and how they had helped her in her time of need. Her children grew up to be kind and respectful, just like their mother. And they too lived happily ever after. The story of Snow White was passed down from generation to generation, a reminder to always be respectful to those who teach us and help us in our time of need. And so, the legacy of Snow White lived on, a testament to the power of kindness, respect, and gratitude. As for the dwarfs, they continued to live in their cottage, happy and content. They remained close friends with Snow White and her family, and they always welcomed them into their home. The dwarfs lived out the rest of their days in peace and happiness, knowing that they had made a difference in the life of a young princess who had become a wise and just queen. And so, the story of Snow White and the 7 dwarfs came to an end. A reminder to always be respectful to those who teach us and help us in our time of need. The moral of the story is clear. Be respectful to your teachers, and you will be rewarded with kindness, wisdom, and happiness.